Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar on Tableau Web Data Connector. So in this webinar, we're going to focus on the week 2, which is Tableau IoT using Web Data Connectors. Last week, we covered Tableau Ecosystem. And in the upcoming webinars, we'll have the Tableau Hyper. That's next week. And on week 4, we're going to have the Tableau Write Back, which is a very interesting feature that we have implemented on top of Tableau. And week 5, you're going to cover the new Tableau CRM Einstein Analytics integration. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. In the last 3 months, we at Softsquare have pivoted our practice towards several initiatives that would help customers effectively handle this crisis, in line with Salesforce's timely introduction of reopening toolset, Work.com. We launched our Work.com practice. We did several webinars educating our customers and prospects on how Work.com's wellness survey, shift scheduling, and health cloud can help companies reopen in a safe way. We have extended the Work.com offering with Einstein Vision for capacity planning, mask detection, and also we have done crowd detection using the social distancing component from Einstein Vision. And we have also integrated all this into the Salesforce Command Center. Also, we have a breadth of other expertise using the Einstein AI solutions. So today's webinar on Tableau Web Data Connector complements our previous webinar on real-time streaming data for mask detection. Now let's see how the Tableau Web Data Connector fits into this architecture. So this architecture was designed for the real-time streaming mask detection. As you can see, the complexity of different technologies that need to be put together, from Amazon to Teradata, Hadoop, all the way down to Google Cloud, IBM Watson, and other components for the AI and computation layer. So looking at this ecosystem, how does the Tableau Web Data Connector simplify this process, or where does it fit in this model? So let's go ahead and overlay the Tableau Web Data Connector. So when we overlay the Tableau Web Data Connector on top of this, the actual Web Data Connector sits in the communication layer, and the hyper data, which is an in-memory data structure, that sits on the storage layer. And the Tableau software itself sits on the computation layer. So this is kind of how the Tableau Web Data Connector sits on top of an existing ecosystem like this. So it simplifies the process. Again, it's a lightweight solution. It's not a very heavy lifting solution. Under 500 million rows is good for a Web Data Connector. But if you're going for millions of rows and petabytes of data, a Web Data Connector may not be the solution. It's a very lightweight solution used for real-time IoT data. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the life cycle of the Web Data Connector, and then we're going to look at 2 live demos today. One is going to be an IoT based on fitness data, and another one is going to be data that we pick from the federal government vendor database using the web API, and we look to see if a specific vendor is active or inactive in the federal government database. It's a very standard practice for any company working with the federal government to have an active status. So this API will connect to a publicly available data through the SAM website. Pull that information, look for the status to see if it's active or inactive, and flag it. And we're going to show you the live demonstration of that in today's demo. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the Web Data Connector. The Web Data Connector, the Tableau Web Data Connector, is an open source solution provided by Tableau. And the link, the GitHub link, is on the top right corner. And essentially, the Tableau Web Data Connector augments the other 46 connectors that Tableau already has. And Tableau has connectors for Salesforce, Oracle, Teradata, to most of the common data sources, Excel, CSV. Now, the Web Data Connector is very specific to a certain data set or data structure. It's like, for instance, data coming from your IoT device that you're using to track a very specific function, we can create these custom data connectors. And the data connector, the web data connector, is based on the HTTPS REST API calls. And we're going to look at the full life cycle of the REST API calls. This website also has a community connector. So once you build your connector, you can share it on the community connector. So Softsquare is going to put the federal government vendor status check on the community connector link. And also we will put the fitness IoT data connector as well in that community connectors link. So it'll be open source, so you can access it and modify it as needed. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the life cycle of the web data connector. So I'm going to use the word WDC for short form. That's easier. Okay, so looking at the web data connector, it has two phases. One is the interactive phase, and the other one is the gather data phase. So these two phases are the main sections, that the screens that you have to work on. The interactive phase is the actual HTML page that you would use to code in the data, the form or the authentication screen or the token. So when you click on Tableau and click on the web data connector and put in the URL, it pulls up a web page, and that web page is rendered in that interactive phase. Now, once you're done with the interactive phase, we go into the next phase, which is the gather data phase. So the gather data phase is where it fetches the data. Essentially, there are three major stages to that, which is the create connector object, and then you define the schema, and then you get the data. The defining the schema is important because in Tableau, you want to go ahead and define the structure of your measures and dimensions, and also the data types and the type of aggregation. So this is kind of like building a table structure. And so you define the table structure on the fly, and then you go get your data, apply it to that table structure, and pass it on to Tableau for visualization. So let's go ahead and break this down into the two phases, go through each of the sections of the phases, and then we will get right into the demo. Okay, at the highest level, the WDC lifecycle starts when you launch the Tableau Web Data Connector from the Tableau desktop application or the Tableau server application. The connector's init method is called by Tableau, which is at A. Okay, in B, the connector calls the passed in init callback function to tell Tableau it has finished initialization. Again, the reason we have all this callback is because the Java script uses event-driven functions, so it's much more asynchronous. So we have to use these callbacks to keep alerting the system that we are done. And let's take a look at the C. And as you can see, connection waits for the user input. And then the D, the connector calls the function tableau.submit, which tells Tableau that the connector is ready to finish the interactive process. As you can see, this is the 4 stages of the interactive phase, where you are looking at a web page. Maybe there's a username and password on C. So once the authentication is done and all the housekeeping is done for you to access the data, then we move right on to submit, which tells Tableau that the connector is ready to finish the interactive phase, and move on to the phase 2, which is to gather the data phase. Very straightforward process. Okay, now once we're done with this, let's go ahead and take a look. After the interactive phase has been completed, Tableau will launch the web data connector in a new headless, meaning there's no web interface at this point. It's just like a dial that's running or a loading icon. So it still has a browser session running in the background. So the Tableau desktop and also the Tableau server uses the Google Chrome open source version called Chromium as the backend engine, just like Node.js is using the JS engine from the Chromium. Tableau is using the Chromium interface, which is a browser session. And we will see that in the demo. Okay, the connector will now be in the gather phase. This phase can be launched from the Tableau desktop, Tableau server, Tableau online, or the Tableau WDC. There is a simulator that you can use to test these connectors. And we will look at the simulator as well. So you can launch it from any of those areas. And then in the gather data phase, the following action occurs. The E is the connector's init method is called by Tableau, just as it did with the initial phase. The init always starts with the init method. The connector calls the passed-in init callback function to tell Tableau it has finished initializing. Again, that's just a loop back. Tableau first calls the get schema method, which you define for your connector to map the web data to the table columns in Tableau. That's again that schema builder. The connector will call schema callback function with a schema object, which passes the connector schema back to Tableau. So now the Tableau environment is getting ready with the new data structure. Tableau then calls the get data method of the connector to get the actual data. The get data method receives a table object as a parameter. In the get data method, the WDC needs to fetch data from that specific table from the web data source and use the table.append rows method to pass the data back to Tableau. That's where the heavy lifting happens. And one more thing to note in this step J is the fact that if you wanted to bring in incremental data, this is where you would do that. So if you were to have this web data connector bring in daily data from a webcam that tracks the number of people walking in a specific area, then this web data connector would connect every day and keep appending that data into the Tableau hyper extract. And again, all this data that goes into Tableau essentially is stored in an in-memory high-performance database called Hyper. So it stores the information in a compressed format using the Hyper database. And that's why you're able to store up to 500 million rows of data and retrieve it within a few seconds. So it's much faster with the Hyper engine. So one of the biggest success of Tableau big data visualization is the Hyper engine, and we will take a look at that in our demonstration today. We are going to take 12 days of Fitbit fitness data, every minute heart rate for 12 days, and you can see how quickly that visualizes in Tableau in our demonstration today. Okay, so this is again the data gathering phase. So we went to J, and right after J, it's finally once all the data has been fetched and it has looped through all the data, your data done callback is called. And once that's done, the WDC flow is completed, and the data now is analyzed within Tableau. That concludes the flow. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the live demonstration. So we went through the details of the lifecycle, and we have a high level on the right side. And again, the web data connector basically, the focus is get the data, get the schema, initialize, and shut down. So it's very straightforward lifecycle. Okay, saying that, now our sales engineer, Kanmani, is going to share her screen, and we're going to go ahead and look at a live demonstration, and we're going to do that now. Thank you. This is the Tableau in the background. We're running a Node.js for the web data connector. Let's go ahead and take a look at our first demonstration is the web data connector for fitness data. So we're going to go into the web data connector, and we have a URL for it. So we click that URL, and the HTML is going to be launched.
It takes some time.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Unfortunately, one of the comments we're receiving is this a low code or no code solution? Unfortunately, it's a low code solution, but the JavaScript is in no way considered low code. But yeah, this is not a low code solution. But what we can do is if you go into the web data connector, once your web front end developer has created the web data connector, all the user has to do is log into this screen and go ahead and access the web data connector. So in this case, and I'll show you the code for this one. Okay, so if we look at the Fitbit code, so this is essentially the actual function that we were talking about, how to connect and take the data from Fitbit. So there's a Fitbit API they provide where we need to authenticate, and based on the authentication, we can go ahead and get the Fitbit health data and load it into Tableau. And there's, of course, a small web page that we put together that is rendering the username, password, and the icons that you're seeing. Okay, let's get back to Tableau, please. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and log in first. So what this essentially does is it accesses your account in Fitbit. So it will go ahead and look at your account, your developer account, and then you can go ahead and choose the number of days. In this case, we're going to choose 12 days. We're going to click Fetch Data. Now, as we click the Fetch Data, that browserless session is running in the background, and it's going out there and bringing the data back. So it all happens so fast, that whole phase one. And now we're on phase two, which is the gathering data phase. Okay. So it went to Fitbit's website, grabbed all that information, brought it here. So let's go ahead and take a look at two pieces of information. So one is the heart rate. So let's pull the heart rate in. So as you're asking about the low code or no code, from a user perspective, it's actually no code. It's basically connecting to your data connector and just dragging and dropping the data. And you can see here the data has been pulled in. And also one of the benefits with this is you can actually join. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in the steps. So let me go ahead and bring in the steps. So now I'm trying to relate the heart rate and the steps together. And let's go ahead and click that. And then it automatically tries to find the common key. In this case, the common key between the two is the minutes. So it's connected to that. And you can always choose to connect with more connectors, more fields. And then let's just go ahead and click update. And now that provides it. And then we can take it right into the actual dashboard. Let's go ahead and open the dashboard that we put together. Thank you. Okay, so now what we did, we pulled in the average heart rate, average steps, and also what we did is we went ahead and pulled in for that 12 days, we pulled in data. And this is, again, the hyper data extract. So we pulled in data for those 12 days for every minute of those days. So look at the amount of data points. So if you were to go in and look at the full dashboard, you can see I'm looking at it on a very specific day. But if I unclick that specific day, you can see it's going to load the entire period. And look at how fast it does it in there you go, under 6 seconds, right? So you can see this is how you can take a large volume of data, look for outliers, look for patterns, and do all kinds of analysis taking your IoT data and converting it in a way that you can analyze it in Tableau. There's so much you can do once you get the data into Tableau. Okay, so that is showing you in real time how to connect to Fitbit and take the data and look at it in Tableau. But it's really not real time when it comes to you actually running and then seeing it in Tableau. Tableau does not do real time with the web data connector. So this is essentially You got the data in Fitbit. From Fitbit, it goes and gets stored into the Fitbit cloud data storage. And what we're doing is we're using their API to go to their cloud data storage and take that data from there and load it into our Hyper database and then visualize it. Let's go ahead and take a look at our next one, which is going to be the SAM data. So what the Web Data Connector provides is it provides an interface for you to test. And this is the simulator. It comes with the simulator. And the simulator is a place where you can actually test your Web Data Connector to see if it's working correctly before actually deploying it on your site. Please, thank you. So essentially, putting it in the simulator kind of helps you look at what's happening in the background. It's like a debug window. So you can see the table structure, and you can also see how the data was returned. Could you do me one favor, please? Could you go into the code, please? Go to the code for this, the JS code.
Yeah,
all right. So scroll all the way up, please. Scroll all the way up to this is where we define the schema at the top. And it's a very straightforward function where we go ahead and define the schema, and where you have the ID, the alias, the data type. You can also have the aggregate type. All the details can be put in here when you define the schema. So let's go and scroll down, please. So we've defined the schema. And then what we have done is we have used the SAM API, which is a federal government API key to access the vendor information. So we pass this URL, get back the JSON result, and then we go ahead and load it into the schema, and we push it right into Tableau. And that's this whole process here. It's just a for loop going through each of the items. Scroll down, please. So if you scroll more, you can see how we're looping through a function append row on line number 135, and that's how we complete the process. So it's fairly straightforward. Once you get a handle of it, you do a smaller data set, and then start with a few fields, and then keep increasing, and then adding more logic to it. Once we connected through that interface and grab the data, here's our information. And as you can see, this matches all the fields. And what we're going to do next is go into the actual sheets. And we just pulled in that information. We pulled in the data, and we just created a small shape indicator to see which vendor is expired. So if you have 600-700 vendors, you can go ahead and pull them up real quick and find out how many vendors are expired, so that when you're doing the purchase orders, you're in compliance with the federal government guidelines. So when you're getting grants and things like that. So when you have a lot of vendors and you want to keep track of the vendors to make sure they're active, or if you want to get any information about a map where you want to plot where your vendors are, any kind of analytics that you want to do with your vendor data can be done using this interface. And we'll provide the code to connect to the SAM API under the Community Web Data Connector. So you can connect there, and you can search by the DUNS number and pick up all the information. So you can have a comma delimited number of DUNS. You can put that in the URL. So you can put up to 255 at this time, 254. So you can do the first round, and then you can go back again and paste again, and you can append. So you can keep doing around 254 at a time. And the SAM API allows you to have query about 1,000 queries per day. So you're restricted to 1,000 vendors per day. Okay, saying that, that actually concludes our demonstration part. Now I'm going to go ahead and take you back and kind of give you a high-level vision of where Salesforce and Tableau are going with the Tableau CRM. We think where they're going with the Tableau CRM and how all this fits together. So let me go ahead and take control of the screen. Welcome back. All right, so now that we had the demonstration, and we will have all the code out ready for you, and we'll send it out to the email. And we also have our campaign manager who can help you. She's going to follow up with you after this with the recording of this webinar and with this information that I've provided here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at where we are going when it comes to the Tableau ecosystem. Sorry, this was a screen grab from one of the Salesforce announcements. This is a very early announcement where they're trying to combine Tableau Analytics and Tableau. So essentially, what we think is that they're going to combine them and call it Tableau CRM. Now, initially, the Tableau has two components, which is standalone and embedded. There's visual analytics and data exploration, data preparation, data management, hyperquery engine, and connectivity. These are the components that Tableau has. And Einstein Analytics has its own components: Analytics Studio, Data Prep, EA Data Store, and connectivity. So I think what they're trying to do is kind of bring those two together. And as you can see how the Tableau CRM kind of blends this together, even though they're still keeping it as two separate products, you can still see that the AI ML is kind of stretching across the two, and the EA data store and the hyperquery is kind of being blended in together. So as you can see, it's slowly kind of converging into one holistic product, I think called Tableau CRM. So looking at it from that perspective, how does all this fit together with our agenda of looking at it, the 5 webinars that we put together? So one of the things we did with the 5 webinars is that we wanted to go ahead and figure out how we can navigate this ecosystem. You know, how can we get the web data connector? How can we look at the Hyper, how to create big data storage, how to use Python API, load large volume of data into Hyper, and use that data preparation component. So that's kind of week 3, which is next week. We're going to focus on Tableau Data Prep. That's an ETL tool for Tableau. And the Hyper is that big data engine. So we're going to take a look at those two and see how it works from a high level. And then on week 4, we're going to look at, okay, now we have data in Hyper from Salesforce. How can we change the data? How can we manipulate the data within Tableau rather than actually going out to Salesforce or other interfaces to go ahead and make the change? Can we do that within the Tableau product? And I think that'll be very useful if you have forecast data or you want to suddenly make a change to a number in the dashboard. It'd be very easy if the write back feature was implemented on top of Tableau. And that's what we're doing, is we're implementing a write back extension that you can use to modify your data right within Tableau. And then on week 5, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Tableau CRM Einstein Analytics. By then, which is about 3 weeks from now, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of how both platforms are coming together, and is there any new APIs? Is there any new functionality that we can use? So we're just going to get an understanding on that and then present it to our customers. Saying that, that concludes our webinar for today. So we're going to go ahead and open the forum for questions, Q&A, and that's it for today. Thank you, folks, for joining.